So Lala Fadma Nasuma was actually a woman of the Kabyle tribe who organized all the soldiers against the French. And here we see a statue of her that was put up um, after her resistance. This is in Algeria. And then also she worked with Bu Bagla. He joined in 1949 and served with her. And so they're very important people for Algerian anti-colonial movements. And then we have Abd el Kader, who's probably one of the most well-known in Algeria um, French resistance leaders. So he united Islamic tribes in the Oran to fight the French. He negotiated the Treaty of Tafnas for control over northern Algeria, but then he was eventually forced to flee to Morocco. Um, and he ended up surrendering himself to the French. And he, I think, ended up living in France and like writing poetry. It's very interesting. Um,
So the Algerian economy was very interesting. They mainly produced wheat, if not all wheat, and the funny thing is they didn't export much. So the cultivation of wheat was mainly done by Algerian natives. In 1862, 5,139,136 acres of land were under cultivation in Algeria, of which 413,112 acres, or on average 8%, were cultivated by European colonists, and 4,726,024 acres, or 92%, were cultivated by natives. And the lack of transportation in Algeria led them to creating an immense amount of grain they could not export. So all of this grain that was being created by the Algerian natives wasn't getting exported to the ocean to get exported to France. And the little they were exporting, however, was going to France, and that was the cause of the fly whisk incident. But so what they did with all the leftover grain was they fed, so pretty much everyone in Algeria would eat things that were made of wheat, and the rest they would either give to they use it as feed for their animals, or they'd store it underground.
So here we have a chart of the African GDP and population movement. The GDP per capita was $430 in 1820 and 1,163 in 1913. That means that it grew by $733, which is a lot. But at the same time, the GDP in France grew by $2,255, which is a lot more. This shows that although the GDP in Algeria grew, France was still the main beneficiary of Algeria's colonization. And then here we have another source that talks about how like the French, like a lot of the top farmland was owned by the French, and how France invested in agricultural, mining, and petroleum industry. And that kind of just talks about how like the French, they got a lot of money from Algeria. A lot of stuff benefited them instead of the actual Algerians.
so now we have the migration patterns. So at first, there were a few failed attempts by the French government. So they had won all this good farmland in Algeria, but nobody really wanted to move there. So they ended up having to send 6,000 convicts in 1852. They forced them to live in Algeria, but by 1856, fewer than 50 had not moved away. Um, so as soon as they were able to, they just left. And so then the government started selling the land for really cheap, but almost all of the land was bought by native Algerians, and if it wasn't bought by them, it was bought by French people who sold it back to native Algerians. Um, Although there was a small group of French settlers, but a lot of them had been like born and raised in Algeria, so they actually claimed to be Algerian um, instead of actually being French. Um, and so there wasn't really a large immigration into Algeria by European settlers until the late 1800s. And these were called the Pied Noirs. And they were a mixture of a lot of different European cultures or European nationalities instead of just French. But then after the Algerian War for Independence, a lot of them fled.